If you grew up playing video games, there's a good chance you're nostalgic for one of Nintendo's IPs. Perhaps your first exposure to 3D platformers was Super Mario 64. Or I guess, possibly Mario Galaxy. God, I'm old. Your first real-time strategy game might have been Pikmin, your first tactical RPG might have been Fire Emblem. Perhaps your first racing game was Mario Kart, and your first fighting game was Super Smash Bros. Maybe your first Souls-like was Legend of Zelda. Nintendo's entire brand is built on that nostalgia you have for their older games. Nintendo is as much aware of your love for their retro library as you are. Of course they're aware of it, how could they not be? I see people like, does Nintendo not realize that we would pay them to play these games? Yeah, obviously Nintendo knows that. You think Nintendo doesn't have a small army of public relations and research and development staff working round the clock to figure out what their customers want? Of course they do. That's the problem, though. They know just as well as you do what you want, and they desperately do not want you to have it. A lot of people lately seem to be waking up to what I've known for a long time, and that is that Nintendo is not a nice company. In the late 80s to early 90s, Nintendo lobbied the Japanese government to change copyright and IP law to make video game rentals outright illegal without the developer's opt-in. And when the same lobbying couldn't be done for the US government, Nintendo attempted to sue now defunct video rental chain Blockbuster. The grounds for the lawsuit? That Blockbuster had been making photocopies of the manuals to place inside of the rental boxes. Renting the games out wasn't illegal in the United States, but photocopying the manuals might have been, so Nintendo slapped them with a lawsuit. Now, obviously, this was not going to prevent Blockbuster from being able to rent out the games, but Nintendo had to punish Blockbuster for daring to cross them. Nintendo and Blockbuster would settle out of court and eventually develop an amicable relationship, with Nintendo giving Blockbuster exclusive access to certain titles for rental. But in hindsight, the truth becomes apparent. See, at the time of Nintendo v Blockbuster, there wasn't a way to copy the contents of a Nintendo cartridge, only the manual, at least for your general consumer. Well, that didn't last long, and Nintendo saw bigger fish to fry, turning their attention to the burgeoning new counterfeit games market exploding out of China and Taiwan. At the time, the general opinion towards this activity was that Nintendo was simply protecting their intellectual property. Of course, Blockbuster didn't have the legal right to duplicate the games manuals, and it was contentious that Blockbuster was renting the games without paying license to Nintendo to begin with. I mean, it's hard to argue with that, because it's technically not wrong. But we live in the year 2020 plus some, and we have the glorious power of hindsight. Nintendo was not happy you were touching their games at all in any way they didn't approve of. Fast forward to the today times, and we're all aware of how Nintendo treats fan projects, emulation, mods, and even competitive communities for older titles. Or rather, the one competitive community for the one older title. I see this argued a lot online, that companies have to behave this way, as if a company doesn't aggressively protect their IP, they waive their rights to it. And to that, I have only one thing to ask. Who the fuck told you that? I mean, it's just observably false. Sega of Japan and Nintendo of Japan are both Japanese companies, beholden to the same copyright law, and look at the difference between the way those two companies treat their customer bases. Now, the truth is that Nintendo both hates and simultaneously relies entirely on your love for their older titles. And why might that be? Well, I'll tell you. It's because Nintendo needs you to remember those games fondly for you to buy their new ones. But if they allowed you to gain access to their older titles, they would be directly competing with themselves from 20 years ago. And I'm gonna level with you. I don't think Nintendo thinks that they could beat themselves from 20 years ago in the free market. Think about this. Let's say Nintendo releases Mario Odyssey 2. That's pretty cool. People are excited. But at the same time as Mario Odyssey 2, they put Mario Galaxy on the Switch eShop. Not only does Mario Galaxy now compete with Mario Odyssey 2, there's a good chance that people might consider Mario Galaxy to be better. People wonder why the Super Mario 3D collection had limited availability when that didn't make sense otherwise. Well, if you think about it, it makes perfect sense. Release it for a limited run in between the release windows for other titles. You can't allow such a game as the 3D collection to exist when there are new Mario games to be sold. Because if a player gets to choose between Mario Odyssey 2 and Mario Galaxy, while they might enjoy Mario Odyssey 2 just as well, it's my personal opinion that they'll enjoy Mario Galaxy more, and that's a new benchmark Nintendo has to compete with that they've only inflicted upon themselves. That's why Nintendo's new strategy is to release trickles of classic games and to lock them behind a subscription service. They can't allow you unfettered access to their original libraries. You might realize their new games just don't stand up to the older ones. That, or it might just distract you from their newer games, and simply can't have that. So they'll put that minimum barrier of entry in front of you, making sure you only see what they want you to see, while simultaneously being allowed to say, look, we are letting you play those older games. See? Right there. You just gotta pay a recurring fee. That's all. Was that Virtual Console? No, we're not doing that. Back when the Wii U was first announced, Miyamoto once said that they were planning on having GameCube games become available in the Virtual Console shop. There was no way that was gonna happen. You see, the really old games, like the ones on the Super Nintendo, they're not concerned about those games anymore, at least as far as competing with their new titles is concerned. Super Mario World doesn't really share the same market space as Super Mario Odyssey 2 would, and I'd argue it doesn't really share the same market space as something like Mario Maker does. So they're unconcerned about you having access to it. Not for free, of course, but you know. But the GameCube? The GameCube, let's talk about the GameCube for a second. In fact, let's talk about the 6th generation of gaming for a moment, because I don't know when else I'm going to be able to talk about it. The 6th generation of gaming, the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and GameCube era, was the greatest era of gaming. Period. The average quality of games that came before and the average quality of games that would come after pale in comparison. Sure, the other generations have good games, I won't argue with that, but the brightest star in the sky invariably causes the rest to lose their luster. During this fabled 6th generation and the 7th generation, Nintendo was all about letting players have access to really whatever they wanted, man. The Wii could play GameCube games, the Wii U could play Wii games, both systems had a pretty sizable Virtual Console library. I remember putting my SNES into storage because I could just buy all those games on the Virtual Console and they were all easily accessible from the Wii. Even though I already owned those games, I was willing to buy them again just for the convenience of having them all stored on the same system and so easy to access. You see, piracy's never been an issue of price, it's always been an issue of convenience. The Game Boy Advance could play Game Boy games, the Nintendo DS could play both Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games, and the updated DS systems would even start having their own Virtual Console libraries. On top of that, the DS had download play. You could play multiplayer games with your friend, so long as one of you owned the game and you both owned a DS. Could you imagine modern Nintendo having a system like that? Where like you bring your Switch over to your friend's house, and they all have a Switch but none of them have Mario Party, but that's okay because you own it, therefore they can all play it on their Switch as long as they're playing it, you know, in the multiplayer with you. Modern Nintendo would never accept something like that. I mean, you can't even have 2 different save files on Animal Crossing. You have to own 2 Switches in order to have 2 islands on Animal Crossing. What the fuck? I don't know what happened at Nintendo to soften their hearts for like a console generation or 2, but it wasn't like that before, and it sure as hell hasn't been like that since. Nintendo were old money, they're old blood. They have values that often seem counterintuitive to the modern Western consumer. One dares not veer away from the perfect Mario. A concept that seems quite foreign to a consumer base that only ever receives bastardized remakes of once beloved IPs. That happens to also be why Nintendo is so hell-bent on stamping out any and all fan-made content, including organized events like Super Smash Bros. Melee. Sure, you could argue they're simply protecting their copyright, but with a more critical eye, it becomes apparent that they are afraid to have the consumer find out that it could be better. In the situation with Super Smash Bros. Melee, they say that what you need to do is you need to get a license in order to run your tournament, which sounds reasonable on its face. But in reality, Nintendo could just let these Super Smash Bros. Melee tournaments go unchecked. There really wouldn't be any skin off their nose. That is, unless playing Super Smash Bros. Melee might make you not want to buy Super Smash Bros. Ultimate 2 Deluxe Edition because Super Smash Bros. Melee might be better. What kills me are the aptly nicknamed Nintendrones that go to bat for Nintendo on social media. We're about 10 minutes into the video now, so I assume there are going to be a few in the comments section. Be sure to also leave a like and a subscribe while you're down there. It's like one of those abused housewife shows on Lifetime. You can do better. Just because he was good to you before doesn't mean you have to defend him now. They see that the idea that I play SNES games on emulators. But like, what if I own that game? If I own the game, what is the practical difference between me playing it on my SNES, me playing it on my Switch, or me playing it on my PC? But you know, what if I didn't own the game? What then, bitch? What are you gonna do about it? You gonna cry because I downloaded Scrimblow Bimblo's Wacky Adventures in Scrunko Land from 1992? A game that Nintendo's never re-released and only exists on a console that ceased production before you were born? Or, a real example, Mario Paint, a product that wouldn't even theoretically compete with other Nintendo products on the market that just inexplicably doesn't exist in any official capacity anymore. Oh no, I'm playing Mario Paint on my emulator. Think of the poor corporation. Surely this will negatively affect Nintendo's profits. Oh no, I'm playing Super Smash Bros. Melee on Slippy. Think of the poor corporation. Surely this will negatively affect Nintendo's profits. Except hold on, wait a second. Smash Ultimate is the best-selling fighting game ever. It's not a fighting game, shut the fuck up. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate is the best-selling fighting game of all time ever, despite having the worst netcode ever put in a fighting game. Despite competing with Slippy, a free Smash Melee multiplayer client with significantly superior netcode, despite all of this occurring during a time where people were restricted to their homes. And the only way to play Smash Ultimate with other people was online. In spite of all of that, Smash Ultimate sold like a dream. So what's it to you? What, why do you care that some dudes want to play Smash Melee over Smash Ultimate? It's no skin off your nose, bro. Nintendo's not gonna sleep with you, bro. The point of all of this is that the people who want to play emulated versions of Nintendo's older games are realistically not going to negatively impact Nintendo's bottom line. But old Ninty does have a vested interest in making sure they stamp that out wherever possible. Because the more people do emulate the old Nintendo library, the more people will be aware that the modern Nintendo may not stand up to the old Nintendo. And people realizing that Nintendo's not as good as they used to be? Well, I suppose that is something that could negatively impact Nintendo's bottom line.